I think that, it really had to come from what feels real, or how people would actually react in the situation. And I feel like as somebody who is bilingual, I think that I sort of had to go by what felt real to me or authentic to me, as how when we're talking in different languages, how we communicate, and how things get translated and things like that. We're sitting here with there's going to be interpretation that's going to happen, and there's a part of it where it's going to be retold. In that. And I think that to me was such a big part of the story.
There's a word in Korean, 인연. It means providence or fate.
Do you believe in that?
That's just something Koreans say to seduce someone.
Because the story does span decades and continents and different cities and also different phases of these characters' lives to be seen literally and very vividly, because it's actually a very big part of the storytelling. And I think that because of that, I thought that it would be best seen in a filmic storytelling form. And I think that really was the beginning.
What a good story this is. Childhood sweethearts who reconnect 20 years later and realize they were meant for each other. In the story, I would be the evil white American husband standing in the way of destiny.
Shut up.
The way the story is being depicted through time and space is the most fundamental way it has to work, but none of it will really work without the performances of the actors. And I think a part of it is that we were working with both the children and the grown-ups to sort of depict different phases of the characters' lives. And I think some of it had to do with the kind of a natural way that the actors were asked to behave like children with each other, even though they were grown adults. And I think that really is the contradiction of that, the contradiction of the child and the adult existing in the same room together. And I think that really was the way that the past could sort of collapse onto the present and sometimes the future too.
There's just this kid in my head for such a long time. I think I just missed him.
Did he miss you?
혜성!
좋다.
뭐가?
그냥 너랑 얘기하는 거.
We did a chemistry read with the children, and we already had the little girl cast, and then she did a chemistry read with 3 boys. And I actually asked the boys to ad-lib a scene where they're asking the little Nora the little girl to stay in Korea with him and not leave. And the boy that I ended up casting did such a beautiful piece of ad-lib that he actually made the little girl cry. And I think that really how I knew that it had to be those two. And I think from that chemistry, because they don't have a lot of lines, but their chemistry has to be the one that endures throughout time. And then of course the tape that I had of the two of them, the 2 kids and their chemistry read, the grown-up actors, they watched to develop their own chemistry too. They were looking at what they were working on to sort of build their own chemistry as adults too. So I think that was really some of the work that we did for the chemistry. I think all of my life I've been watching films, but I feel like so much of what I wanted is for the movie to have its own language and have its own way of telling the story that can sort of stand on its own and exist on its own without referencing others. But I do know that there's some language from different films that I really pulled in for the movie. So for example, My Dinner with Andre, the way that conversation unfolds, I was watching that and talking about that when it came to, for example, near the end of Past Lives, where they are just sitting in a bar and having a conversation. And then, of course, they're just, there's Breaking the Waves we were talking about, and I was talking about that with Greta Lee, who plays the main character, about her, the kind of this a very just powerful performance, but also breaking of the fourth wall, turning to the camera, which actually happens many times in that film, that felt like was the right language for this movie. So it really was about pulling from different films to put together a language of its own for this movie. So for example, when the character Arthur, who only really speaks English but is trying to learn Korean, and Haesung, who doesn't speak English but speaks Korean, when they meet each other for the first time, what mattered to me is that Arthur, who only speaks English, is saying hello to Haesung in Korean. And of course, Haesung says hello to Arthur in English. So part of the story is about trying to understand each other's language and trying to speak each other's language because, and it's really in the effort. It's not really about how good you are at the language. It is about if you're trying to speak each other's language and care about it, you know. Yeah, well, I think that it really did start from a really personal place of, you know, I found myself sitting in a bar, sitting between my childhood sweetheart, who had come to visit me from Korea, and my husband, who I live with in New York City. And I was sitting in this bar in New York, translating between these two guys in terms of language and culture, but then eventually I realized that it's, you know, I'm translating between parts of my own self. And I think that really experience is really the beginning of this whole film. But I think from there, I think in turning it into a movie, which is an object, which is now going to be seen in so many different cinemas on its own terms. And of course, I'm also asking actors to play characters. And doing that, it sort of became an objective process where I wasn't asking the actors to play a person who exists. I was asking them to play the character that is in the film. So much of it, I think eventually by the time that I was making the movie, I was really thinking about it as making a movie. Aratsaldeon Donosti. Hi to the audience here. And I just wanted to say the film is a very personal film, and it's my very first film. Thank you so much. I enjoyed the film.